what an amazing, fascinating modern world we're living in when we're able to do this and able to do this at all. And if it is difficult, and I'm beyond grateful to Stephen and Mark for their talents and help in putting all this paraphernalia together. And if it is difficult, well, or if it doesn't work well, we'll just think of all our technology here. Like Dr. Johnson said when he was asked what he thought of the workings of Parliament. And he responded, well, they don't do it well, that is true, but the miracle is that they can do it at all. And we are very much like this. What we will do over the next few days is look, I hope, at some of the deep and the hidden moral questions that involve the technology which is increasingly subsuming our lives. Many of these we do not think of much. How many of you take for granted your wristwatch? How many of us drove here to church? How many of us have come to realize, really, that our cars are simply computers with motors attached? Question. I have debated on which metaphor shall I use to start this off in terms of the hidden moral questions that are involved. And I've had an idea. I had very few ideas. I'm very proud of this one. Who turned on the lights? Who switched on the lights? Somebody this morning. Ricky, maybe? We depend on Ricky for everything else. I suppose we should depend on him for that. Ricky, flip the switch. But did he turn on the lights? Who turned on the lights? What is involved in turning on the lights? Encore. Funny tangential stories about Encore. Everybody's friends. Was it Encore? Was it? Who turned on the lights? Have you thought about the electric light? How many of you have been watching The Gilded Age? I see some that have been watching the new show on TV about the late 1800s, early 1900s, and social doings in New York City at the time. There was an episode the other night about Mr. Edison turning on the lights in some building and how miraculous it was. Have you thought about how astonishing that really is in the history of mankind? Something we take so much for granted that we don't think about it. It's been a part of our lives as long as all of us have been alive, has it not? We have become at one with the electrical grid. But a few years ago, the great historian William Manchester, he's the one that wrote that unbelievable trilogy about Churchill, The Last Lion and all that. Manchester wrote a book titled A World Lit, L-I-T, Only by Fire. A world lit only by fire. Until the 20th century, sun and fire were the only ways to get physical light. The only ways. And now it is something that is so incredibly easy, we take it entirely for granted. And when it was started, the only real questions that anyone asked were, would it work? And how cheaply can we deploy it? Only later did it occur to everybody to be saying, when problems started developing, houses started burning down. We need to regulate this somehow. We need to put some boundaries. We need to put some requirements on how these things are operated in order to make them more efficient, more safe, and cheaper. Efficiency, safety, cheaper were always the objectives. There wasn't anything behind it. Now, what I want to do, what I want to ask, who turned on that light? Who turned on that light? Was it Ricky? Was it Encore? Was it the designer who designed that light? Was it the construction folks, bless them, they will be with us forever, who created it and who put it here? Was it the lineman who arranged for that, for the thing to be connected? Was it the miners who dug the minerals and the metals and the people who shaped them and formatted them? What about the truckers who got it here? Who turned on the light? And I asked too, what's it cost? What's it cost just to turn on the light? By the way, for those on Zoom, I'm looking somewhat accusingly at the light switch. What does it cost to turn on the light? Well, incrementally, once you've got everything set up, not a lot. But is that really what we should be thinking about? Are there any externalities that we haven't considered or that we just simply don't because we take it for granted? I read the other day the most fascinating phrase. Capitalism never considers externalities. It assumes them out of the equation. I'm a big capitalist. It's not a slam on capitalism, but do you know what an externality is? It's an economist term for a cost which is external to the real cost of what you're talking about. That is, I say real cost, to the basic facial cost of whatever it is you're talking about. It's the consequences that you don't expect, that you don't see, that you don't think about, that you don't take into consideration. What is the cost of turning on that light bulb, that light switch, or any others? Do we need it? This room has buku light. We could open those shades right there and probably, and those doors, and probably do without. Do we need it? Do we need less of it? Do we need as much as we're using? Do we need, are these the most, the new LED ones or whatever those things are? Do we need all that? Do we, energy from what? Gas? Probably around here. Is it sustainable? What are the consequences of that? What's it cost? Is that cheaper for us to run here in Texas because the main power plants are not winterized like they are outside the Texas's own grid? Texas's own grid was not winterized. We all lived through the February 21 episode, but it is not winterized because simply winterizing it is expensive. And we decided not to because it was not likely to happen. That decision was made a long time ago, and we saw the consequences of it. That has saved a whole bunch of money. But we saw the consequences of that in February of last year and got to reflect on them as we were sitting there freezing. Now, that was great. That lower cost is great for an awful lot of people. But let's consider, was it great for the 800 who died? Or was it great for all those numbers of people who lost tremendous amounts of no telling what because of everything being shut down during that period of time? Has anybody thought that through when they flip a switch, turn on a light? But those are some of the deep and hidden from what? Hidden not by law, hidden not by any kind of decree of practice, hidden by practice, hidden because we take it for granted because we're human. and some of the great moral questions that are down underneath it. Have you ever been in a Section 8 apartment? Section 8 is subsidized housing and so on. Or in a shack deep in East Texas or along the border, or in one of what we used to call the projects back in my native Georgia. Have you noticed it's dark? Very dark, uncomfortably dark, hard to read in dark. Why? Because their electricity is not taken for granted. Every light bulb, every switch counts. And that cost is calculated, that monetary cost is calculated very precisely at a very human and clear area. Is that something that we ever occur to us? And my favorite of all are the thing of these kind of awkward examples is are the things that may be costs that we simply have no way of realizing in our own minds. Everything I've just described, we can noodle it out. But there are often things that come out of left field that you just never imagine. Look at the cover on the light switch. Just the plastic cover. Notice it's plastic. Plastics harden over time, right? We've all experienced that. When they are brand new from the manufacturer, they're marginally softer than eventually they become brittle and crack and so on, and they harden. And what is happening is various sorts of gases are being released from that plastic, any kind of plastic, some more than others, into the room and its atmosphere. Some people are deathly allergic to that. I did not know that until some years ago. It happened that someone up in Northeast Texas was a woman was of no particular monetary means, was experiencing this and had become in effect a hermit because she could not live around plastic, any kind of plastic of any kind. And we wound up trying to do something for her, et cetera. But I mention that only because that is an example of a consequence of what to us is the most banal technology that we would never think of. Who knew? Who knew? Now, how do we address these sorts of things? Now, I ask, come now to the great question that confronts all of us today, which is this: what effect does it being so easy for us to flip the light switch and light comes on, what effect does that ease and convenience have on us? You can flip the switch. Now, in this case, it takes going over there. I'd have to walk. How many of you have one of those lamps where you clap it, light goes on, light goes off? How many of you have an Alexa or a Siri, and you just tell that thing, whatever your name is, turn on the light? I read my all-time favorite joke the other day, where a guy was talking to his therapist, and he said, I am just so sad and troubled. I'm having the worst time in my relationships with women. And the therapist sent him home and said, ask your device, what does your device say? So he went home and he asked, Alexa, what do I need to do better in my relationships with women? And it paused, and the machine answered, my name is Siri. What effect does it have on us to be able to, with the sound of our voice, to turn on a light switch on the other side of the world from where we are sitting? May I read you something you'll recognize? In the beginning, the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And a word from God swept over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that it was good. I picked this simple place to start because it is where our scriptural tradition tells us the Almighty started. And the question becomes, for this most basic of our technologies and all the technologies to come with which I am draped, which all of you are wearing, and which all of you have in your pocket, what does it do to us to be able to take for granted and to take for granted the very place where the scriptures start? That's what I want to talk about with you over the next few days and what I really want to be thinking about. What else is easy that we're taking for granted? What else is, cool and shiny and metallic, and I can't help but pick it up? I absolutely have to pick it up. I got to. What else is like that? What is coming? What technologies do you take for granted right now? Just the things that have occurred, just the transformations in the adult lifetimes of the people in this room. Since the time the changes, since you started your working or your adult career to now. What else have you been taking for granted, or have you just come to absorb without really examining? And all that is necessary in order to think about and see what's coming next. What do you think's coming next? What do you think's coming next? Have any of you ever read or perhaps even subscribed to Wired magazine? Yeah, several of you have. The rest of you don't. It will scare you to death. It will terrify you of what is coming. But you can see it. You can see it. I'm thinking of some particular kinds of examples. One of the most recent articles of that was asked the question, can, not may, can physically a new reality be jacked into your brain, either electronically, chemically, biochemically, or somehow? the issues of bioethics and what I call human enhancement, divine creation and human enhancement, are something let's look at. That whole category of technology is something we can talk about next week or the next, I forgot which, and so on. That's one. Sadly, the history of warfare has historically brought, each one brings astonishing and dramatic improvements in technology, which we have to find later ways to pacify and to devote to useful, peaceful intentions. This month, it's drones. This month, it's drones. A few years ago, speaking of drones, the other day, I noticed that there were news reports of Amazon and some of them starting to use drones to do house-to-house deliveries. Have you seen that? Some of the news is kind of exciting, kind of interesting. 8 years ago, give or take, I put that on an exam question for an SMU course as just a wild, ridiculous possibility. And set up as a dreamy sort of ridiculous thing, and set up as the hypothetical. Some young people that thought this would just be the coolest thing, and people my age saying that's the silliest thing I've heard of. That was then, this is now. What's coming next? What is happening next? All of the things that these questions that we want to talk about together are asking are leading, like all roads lead to Rome. There's a phrase in an article I read, all roads in this topic lead to this question. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? And I would add to that, what does it mean to be a child of God? Who we are. More importantly, whom we want to be. Closer to God, closer to one another, and to expand our communities of one another to embrace the whole world. Will this stuff help? It's certainly helping this morning, isn't it? Because of our friends in distant places that we're able to reach, we're able to talk to. And can you not see God's hand in that? Can it not also blind us in ways that we take for granted? Or, more humanly even, don't consider because we're focused on other things as we go forward. I call this skidding into the digital age because we don't do, historically, a good job of planning these things into the future. We always do this. It's absolutely human nature. We build, we develop, we create, we invent first, and then we figure out what all the problems are and the externalities and all what we didn't think about and the unforeseen consequences and respond to those later. Best example ever of that, the car. Think about the earliest days of the car, okay? Bouncing down the roads. Think of the earliest days of the car. Well, what was Henry Ford thinking? Well, build one people can afford and make sure it works. Anything else? Not really. And everything since then is developed or has progressed around. Let's make sure that it makes money and that it works. But pretty soon, people being people, they start running into each other. Well, now what? And you can't see in the dark. And you can't, the wind's blowing you over. So pretty soon you get headlights, you get windshields, you get road signs, you get traffic signals, you get guardrails of every imaginable type. You get better, you have to have better roads, you have to have warnings of any kind so people can tell what's coming. You have to have brake lights. The brake lights have to be bright enough to see, but not so bright as to blind you. Which means they also have to have those Fresnel lenses like lighthouses have on them, so that the light doesn't just come piercing out like out of a conventional flashlight. See? All these things were born of experience. We're born of experience. How many of you grew up with your mothers doing this every time she put on the brakes? Okay? You know it. You know you had. You know you had. Seat belts came along. You remember when shoulder seat belts came along? Not, I would add, to thunderous applause. Remember, you didn't like them. I didn't either. Nobody does. But what was everybody's experience? Same thing with airbags. Own and own and own. We build first. Then we look at the responses to what happens. And while we are trying to make it better, faster, cheaper, and more lucrative, we're also seeing problems that are developing and we're trying to fix them as we're going. Two parallel tracks at once, but the fixes come later. We usually learn the problems the hard way. Now, with these kinds of technologies, the new kinds of technologies, not only the human enhancement stuff, but the digital communication stuff, it is so fast, so comprehensive, we may not have time. We may not have time. Oh, you know what? People are running into each other all the time. I think we need to have some bumpers or headlight or whatever. We may not have time to fix it. Let me tell you a little factoid just on a matter of data use and data privacy and so on right now. Suppose I were to develop a questionnaire about you for you to answer. Doesn't matter what the answers are, but the questionnaire would be very comprehensive. It would be like 200 questions or something like that that you would answer about yourself. What do you like? What do you not like? How much do you like it? How much do you not like it? In XYZ circumstance, what would you choose and by how much and how often? What would be a real turnoff? What would you really object to? What would send you running for the exits or at least just resolve not to do that again? And by roughly how much? See what I mean? Go through. Now imagine you've answered a question like that about yourself. 200 of them, 200 of those questions. Got it? Okay? Now, let's take that same questionnaire about you. Let's give that questionnaire to 2 people and 2 computers with algorithms. All right? Here are the 2 people. Your best friend, whom you've known forever, knows everything there is to know about you, and your spouse. And let's give it 2 computers. All right, well, who are they? Well, they're 2 computers that have some of these algorithms built in which analyze data about people in order to predict all kinds of things. Let's give the questionnaire about you to one computer that has 75, only 75, random data points about you. Doesn't matter what. 75 knows 75 things about you. What you bought, where you've been, what you've done, what you've run away from. And let's give it to a computer that has 300 data points about you. Okay? So we got your best friend, a computer with 75 data points, your spouse, and a computer with 300 data points about you. Got it? And we're going to ask them to take that same questionnaire, take that quiz about you. Statistically, it is a fact that the computer with 75 data points chosen at random about you will out-predict what you think, what you like, what you would do in a certain circumstance, out-predict your best friend. And the one with 300 will out-predict your spouse, no matter how long you've been married. And I can add to that there are no shortage, none, no shortage of companies in this country that have between 6,000 and 8,000, moving toward 12 and 16,000 data points about every single consumer in the United States. All of us. Now, no shortage and no limitations on to speak of on what they can and can't do. Now, guess who else has got that?
The Chinese.
And the Russians. Now, that is what I mean by taking things for granted. The opportunities to manipulate cruelly or for good are right there. Last issue of one of these magazines I read had a picture, I had of the center of it, where on both sides of the page there were 100 faces of all kinds of people, every age, every gender, every circumstance, every race, you name it, smiling, angry, happy, whatever. 100 pictures. You look and say, well, who's this bunch? They were all computer generated from various kinds of composites of real people. One lonesome picture was real. And it dared you to figure out which one. It dared you to figure out which one. I failed ignominiously. I tried and tried and tried. And this one. Oh, this one's got to be fake. Nope. I mean, this one's got to be real. Nope. Finally, I gave up and looked up the answer. And I compared, well, how could I have told? What could I have done? If that can be done, why can't fake videos be done by authoritative people? Well, the answer is they can, rather painfully, readily, in fact. It's been estimated that 60% of the comments and the communications running across it, better than half, are bots, robots. Generated by who knows who, but somebody with an objective. The objective may not be licit. These are things that we have to be watchful for. We are creating, because this is really cool, this is shiny. We are creating technologies here which are not entirely within our control. Now, we've done this before in the world. One of the most dramatic titles I ever read, I ever saw for a book of essays, was written by a well-known, well-regarded English professor at Rutgers named Paul Fussell. And he was a veteran of World War II. He was an award-winning writer. He was a serious writer of English literature. But he had been badly wounded during the Battle of the Bulge. But not so badly wounded, enough to be adjudged 40% disabled, but not so badly wounded as to be disqualified from being included in the first wave that was expected to be launched in the invasion of Japan, from which the estimates projected 100% casualties. Now, it happened, of course, that we didn't wind up needing to invade Japan, but afterwards, in the 1970s, there arose a debate on whether we should have developed and deployed the atom bomb. And Fussell wrote a series of essays, published some of his debate. And I wish we could have this level of thoughtful debate now on that topic. And he titled it, "Thank God for the Atom Bomb." We've developed that technology, which is beyond our control, with many others besides we have before. And in those circumstances, we are still struggling to find doctrines and ways to corral these technologies besides just simply fencing and containment. And that debate, of course, has risen again right now. Right now. And guess who is watching with keen interest how that gets resolved? North Korea. That we are with that one, that the development of nuclear weapons was in the context of World War II. But we are developing things now and building lives and whole economies around and on top of technologies which have been developed largely because they're cool, shiny, and really, really valuable in the marketplace. And do giant amounts of good, but are just capable of giant amounts of evil. What we are going to be talking about and are starting to think about now, I can see it in your eyes, are how do we approach this? How do we look at it? Now, I am not a Luddite. I am not William F. Buckley Jr. You remember him? Who famously said he stood on athwart the midships of history, looking at the tide of history sweeping in and holding up his hand and yelling, "Stop." No, I'm not William F. Buckley Jr. And I love technology as much as the next 60-something does, especially 21st century medicine. Everybody said, well, wouldn't you like to go back? No, not unless I can take my internal medicine guy with me. No, Now, I add that I do wonder how I'll like it when one of these days my nurse is a robot with artificial intelligence built in. But I'm optimistic enough to say, hey, that sounds cool. that sounds fine. Artificial intelligence sure beats natural stupidity, doesn't it? But the great question is, one thing to wonder about, is anybody else asking these questions? Is anybody else asking these questions? If you ask most technology people, do you spend all day developing all this stuff. Do you ever consider the moral underpinnings of it or the ethical issues that surround any of this stuff? I've done this. I've gone to some friends who are into this, who do this for a living, and who are enormously, frighteningly talented at this stuff. And I ask that question, and they look at me. No. I just need to develop this. I need it to work, and I need it to be fast. Okay? But that's the norm. But it is starting to. It is starting to happen. There are a surprising number of people who are starting to realize this across the world. It is part of it is not happening in isolation. These questions are not starting to be asked just in isolation, but you see the little grassroots coming up from Mumbai, from Hong Kong, even from Shanghai, San Francisco, and so on. There was a great article in the Times last summer, the summer of 21, that had the title that I wanted to use for this course. It had the title, the greatest title of all time, Looking for God in Silicon Valley. Looking for God in Silicon Valley. And here's an example. What is happening is people are starting to ask these sorts of questions about the technologies that they are so frantically and frenetically building. And they are saying these questions, some of them, it's occurring to some of them. So wait now. Are we the first people to be thinking about these topics, to be thinking about these subjects? And the answer is coming back to those stalwarts. No, we're so glad you've asked. We've been thinking about it through our traditions, through our cultures, through our texts, through our faiths for 4,000 years. How about we actually find a way to put those together and find, as the Times put it, find a place in the algorithms for our faith and our texts and our cultural traditions and the study, the effort that the greatest minds of humankind have been able to apply to this ever since recorded history began. And it's starting to happen. You're starting to see more companies asking this question. Even Deloitte, the consulting side of Deloitte, which is about as secular as it gets, are developing whole groups and business areas that don't do anything else. And they're telling these big companies, you have to hire ethicists. You have to hire professional ethics people to help you work through all this, train your folks, do all this stuff. Here's a list of 300 questions you need to be asking about every sort of everything. And it's especially about this artificial intelligence, which I'll describe to you in just a second how it actually works. But how are we going to examine these questions ourselves? Just us here now. Usual rules apply of everything that I wind up doing. This is going to be an extremely safe place. Extremely safe place for everybody. You can say whatever you think, and nobody's going to jump on you. Nobody's going to criticize. Nobody's going to. I will not let you embarrass yourself. Even if you are headed down a road that I know where that's going. I will head you off like a gentle sheepdog before you embarrass yourself. Count on that. This will be a very safe place, but I want you to interrupt. This is not one of those, when I ask, what do you think? Can you think of something like this? Is this sort of thing experience? Anything starts off with, well, what about? Well, what if? Well, I heard about so-and-so. Well, what's that I read about X, Y, Z? All that's perfectly safe and perfectly game, okay? All right, we will do that. But here's what And in fact, according to what y'all are interested in and what really kind of how things evolve, I may edit all these notes substantially as we go, okay? So, and talk about things that are of most interest to you and most applicability to you. But here's what I want generally. We're going to be talking about the differences among technology and science, faith, and ethics, which are somewhat in the middle. We're going to talk about different frameworks of how you approach these different things, frameworks of thought and approach, including how you make decisions that are based on technology and science, how you make decisions that are based on ethics and morals, and how you make decisions that are based on faith. And how those overlap and where they don't. And we'll talk about how we integrate all of these together, and especially how we apply all this in our lives. The various responsibilities that we all have: individual, social, corporate. One of the most fascinating things that's happened in my adult lifetime has been, and it has been two near 180-degree turns on how businesses regard their own responsibility. To whom does a business owe its responsibility? That answer has flipped 180 degrees twice just since I've been working. And one of these flips is newer than a lot of our cell phones. And we want to be talking through this. And we're going to do this by focusing on a couple of different kinds, which we'll start this next Thursday, a couple of different kinds of issues: your bioethics and your human enhancement stuff, your communications technology and human choice, and to the extent, and what all our responsibilities are in this. Now, in the moment or two that we just have left, I'll give you a taste of it. What's the difference? What are ethics? Anybody, what are ethics? What are your ethics? Good and bad. Good and bad.
Your value system.
Value system. Good and bad and your value system. You know the difference between ethics and morals? Difference between ethics and morals are things you're touching on right there. Ethics tends to be behavior focused. How are you going to act in this sort of circumstance? You know, it wouldn't be ethical for me to go steal this or poach that, so on and so forth. Morals tend to focus on your values. I value human dignity more than I value this, that, or the other. So they are slightly distinct but overlap, and we won't make much of that. But these stand in the middle between technology and faith. That is the absolutely fascinating thing. Where do ethics and morals and faith intersect? Where do they intersect? And I'll leave you today with this particular point. Ethics and morals are obviously a key component of almost every faith tradition. But virtually every faith tradition approaches them in a different way with one common overlap, which I'm open to correction, but subject to being corrected, is the one thing that is common to every faith tradition in any culture at any time, including those that have been completely unknown to one another, absolutely common to all. But outside that one, you know what it is? The golden rule. the golden rule, phrased as many ways as there are faiths, has been common to every single faith tradition in human history. But beyond that, they're applied very, very differently, very widely, including within Christianity. The code of Hammurabi, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, finds its way into some of the wisdom literature and historical literature of the Old Testament. It was described as one famous person's favorite Bible verse. It was expressly disavowed by Christ himself. And I say unto you, turn the other cheek. Offer him the other cheek up also. Even within Christianity, you see development, you see change, you see evolution. And that is going to be true with virtually every faith tradition I've ever heard of or ever studied, but with that one commonality, which is the golden rule. That one was the golden rule. So we have different lenses that we can look through and study through ethical lenses, theological or faith tradition lenses, and through technical and technological lenses, and we will do all that. We will do all that in the context of all this. So thank you so very, very much. I appreciate it and very excited that we're off to what I hope is a good start. I am very grateful to you, and I hope we'll see you next week.